Hey everyone, it's Pocket, and today we will be looking at some stuff I made for one of my BJDs, more specifically one of my minifees. Now I just want to stress before we begin that this is not going to be a tutorial. Like I said in my previous video, this is just to show you how you can go about doing these things and just to give you some ideas. And the very first tip I have for anyone going into a project like this is make a sketch of what you really want. It can be messy or detailed, it really doesn't matter. It just is there to help you visualize what you want and really flesh out your design. Once you have all the design elements figured out, then you can really approach how you're going to go about constructing your garment or your accessories. For me, I already had a base of which to work from, so I knew I was only going to do a few things. Another tip I have is to use a reference book. I use this one, I'm not sponsored by the way, but it's just incredibly helpful. It gives you a good overview of garment construction, patterns you can use, and also just general sewing information. And here you will see the items I did not make, so these items of clothing my doll already had before I started the project, and it's good to keep in mind what you're going to add to the doll, so that you have to keep in mind how much bulk, the extra bulk there is going to be. As you can see, the dress closes up in the back with a zipper. Also, I did not make my doll's shoes. Now, all three of these items were made by my mum for me previously, and these shoes actually belonged to a different doll before, and now they belong to this doll. The very first item of clothing I actually made were these socks. Now, they're not the best, and they didn't turn out that great. I'm probably going to redo them at some point. I kind of messed up with the pattern in that I made them a different length, so you can see that was a bit of a fail. But this second item of clothing I made was this underskirt. Now for this I used a very lightweight tool that is very flowy and nice, and I used a very simple formula to figure out the measurements that I needed for the skirt. If you're interested in those, I will be providing the measurements in the description box. And as you can see all along the bottom, just to add visual interest, I took a separate piece of tulle and gathered it and then attached it all along the bottom, so I've got this nice flared and flowing bottom. It was my first time gathering fabric and I really enjoyed the process. If you have the patience to do it, I highly recommend you do it, because something as simple as this can really add a lot of interest to an outfit, especially now because the gathered ruffles of the tulle peek out underneath the blue dress that she's wearing, so I really like the way it turned out. The skirt closes really simply up top. I just added this piece of similarly coloured ribbon that I had lying around to the tulle, and then I just tie a knot in the back, and that's how she wears her skirt. Definitely one thing to consider when you're making garments on dolls: how are they going to close? It's really important to figure that out before you make. The next item of clothing I made is something that actually goes underneath her dress, so here I really had to be mindful of not creating extra bulk, and it's this lace bustier that goes underneath, and it's just to cover up her cleavage, because for me personally, for my taste, there was a bit too much cleavage showing. And this is technically what it looks like underneath. This is actually not what she's wearing. This was my first attempt, and as you can see, it's very, very small. It also has no stretch left anymore. It's basically 2 layers of the tulle fabric with a piece of lace sewn on at the top. However, as you can see, there's no closing mechanism, and because I made it too small, I could not get it over her shoulders, so that was a bit of a bummer. What I ended up doing with the other piece was I sewed a piece of Velcro to the back, just a really thin strip of Velcro, and that solved my problem, so lesson learned there. It was also my first time sewing lace trim on fabric, and a tip I have here is that you should really practice this thoroughly before you go on to your piece, because it can be a bit tricky to really align the stitch with the lace, and it's just important to practice it. And here you can see the pattern that I ended up making for the surcoat, which is what she wears on top of the dress. Now traditionally, a surcoat has gauze coming out the side, which are 2 triangular strips of fabric that just come out the side of it, and it makes it a bit more flared. But I decided to go for a more simpler cut, basically using just a front and a back piece. The back piece has an elongated bottom, and the front piece has a more rounded off front. And as you will later see, I had to make a few adjustments to the fabric along the way. One of the benefits of working with leather is that you can cut it and not worry about hemming the raw edges. You can basically just leave them raw. Now, I was working here with suede, which meant I had to really adjust my stitch length to fit the fabric, which I recommend you do anyway, regardless of fabric that you're using. In the back, I had to take it in with 2 separate stitches because I realized I had too much excess fabric and it was kind of standing off her back. It wasn't fitting right, so I had to do that afterwards. As you can see, it's not too visible in the back. I'm okay with the way it looks, but next time I make the pattern, I will be able to draft it much better to fit her more snugly in the back. For the front, for the closing, all I did was I hammered in a few eyelets and took again, very similarly coloured ribbon and strung that through there. Sorry for all the excess hair, that was from her wig. As you can see on the side, it goes a bit further down, so you can see a little part of her corset there. And as a final detail, I went along the edges and did a decorative top stitch. Now, I followed all the way around and made these patterns with my sewing machine. You can also do this by hand, but with leather it's a bit tricky to do it with just by hand because leather is thicker than your regular fabric. So if you want to do some sort of embroidery, I recommend a top stitch. It just looks nice and you have this little extra detail. And here is the finished surcoat in a better lighting situation with the underdress or the petticoat and her little top that I made. I thought it turned out really nicely. Of course, the pattern is not perfect. You can see up top that it's not symmetrical, and that's because I did make adjustments to the pattern after finishing the sewing, but these are just things that I will get better at over time. Now on to the accessories. For one, I wanted to make her a felted hat, and with this hat I had to go through multiple attempts before I was able to get the correct pattern for it. I really wanted to have like a sort of witch's hat that had a nice little tail in the back, and I wanted to work with felt and sewing 2 felt pieces together, but all the patterns I went through were not working and they just weren't sitting right or fitting her head. And then eventually I figured it out and I ended up with this. Now this is the pattern that I actually ended up using in the end. Always make sure when you're actually making a pattern that you mark which side is meant to be open, because I actually stitched this together wrong. I stitched the head part together, and so I was wondering why it wasn't fitting on her head. Well, clever me. You live and learn. So I also just made a little marking where I knew I wanted the tip to be, and yeah, just so I didn't make any more mistakes. Now next up, I felted the tip on because I wanted it to be a bit more curly and a bit longer. I made this very crude hat stand out of some foam, felting foam, and what I did was I just took some felt, as you saw just now, and I felted on the tip. And then as a added bonus, I covered the seams with some felt and felted that down so that the seams would appear a bit more invisible. You can still tell that they're there, but they're like blended into the rest of the hat, and I think it makes it look cleaner. And as a final detail, I'm all about the details in this. I stitched on this cross, just a few stitches in and out of the loop, and also I made her a little necklace using the same ribbon that I used to close her surcoat. This was a fiddly piece of work. I was stuck on that one for a while, but it was really worth it in the end because now I have lots of little details that catch attention in her outfit, in her dress, and I'm really liking it so far. So that's definitely one thing that I will keep doing in future projects. I will keep adding small details to look at because they may seem insignificant at first, but at this scale, at such a small scale, they really pop and they can tie a whole outfit together. And that is it. So those are all the items that I made. I hope you enjoyed this little project recap. I definitely will be doing more of these in the future. Let me know if you liked the way I made this video, if you thought it was informative, if you liked the voiceover. I know I was a bit rambly, more or less in this video, but I like to review things. I like to kind of, be self-reflective about what I do, and yeah, I really enjoyed making all of these things and learning from them. Mainly, definitely the main take-home message for me from this project was with drafting patterns, just to be more careful and more mindful of how they will fit once they're done. thinking about how different fabrics behave and such. That's very important. Also, details. Lots of details. Oh my gosh, so many details. Details really make or break an outfit. Color coordination, again, I learned a lot there. Tying things together, using materials again like the ribbon for the necklace and for the closings. Sewing on lace, that was a big step forward for me, being more precise with my stitches. And yeah, just a great learning experience really. So I hope you enjoyed this, I hope you gathered a lot from it, and as always, have a happy dolly day. I'll see you soon. Bye!